My own daughter handed me a one-way ticket and left me at the Greyhound station like I was an old suitcase she no longer wanted. No hug, no glance back, just her husband Jason saying, "She'll figure it out." I stood there with no luggage, no return home, surrounded by strangers rushing past as if I didn't exist. They thought they had erased me, but tucked against my chest was an old card my late husband made me keep, a lawyer's number, and that number would become the key to tearing apart the future they thought they had stolen from me. If you've ever given everything to your family only to be discarded like nothing, then don't look away. This is my story. My name is Eleanor Harris. I am 67 years old, a widow from Ohio. For most of my life, I was known only as a wife and a mother. After Charles died, I thought at least I still had family to lean on. I was wrong. I can still hear the sound of those fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, the kind of sound that sinks into your bones when you are already tired. Cleveland's Greyhound terminal was alive with movement. Coffee machines hissing, luggage wheels clattering across tile, babies crying, drivers shouting boarding calls. The whole world was moving somewhere, hurrying to belong. Everyone had a ticket, everyone but me. Melissa stood in front of me, her hand resting on the sleek handle of her suitcase. She didn't even pause. She pressed a flimsy ticket into my hand like she was passing me a grocery list. Her lips curled into that sharp little smile, the one I'd seen too many times. "We only bought you a one-way. You'll figure it out?" she said, her voice smooth, practiced. The words were a knife. They didn't tremble. They didn't hesitate. They landed with the kind of certainty that told me she had rehearsed them. Jason lingered nearby, his face half-turned, as if the tiled floor had suddenly become the most interesting thing in the world. He didn't defend me. He didn't argue. He didn't even look up. His silence was its own sentence. I stood frozen in that moment, staring down at the ticket in my palm. One way. My chest tightened. The edges dug into my skin as I clenched my hand until the paper bent and creased. The cheerful lie they'd told me, a family trip, a little healing after the funeral, crumbled right there in the noise of the station. They hadn't invited me out of love. They hadn't even meant for me to come back. "Melissa," my voice cracked as I tried to speak. "What do you mean one way? Where's my bag? Where?" But she was already adjusting her purse strap, sliding her suitcase toward the boarding line. Jason moved with her, his phone glowing in his hand. Neither of them turned back. I wanted to shout, to scream her name until the whole terminal stopped and looked. But the words stuck in my throat, heavy, bitter. My pulse thudded so loud it drowned out the announcements on the loudspeaker. Travelers kept moving around me, eyes skimming past quickly. That polite kind of avoidance you use when you see someone falling apart in public. A woman dragging two toddlers gave me a soft smile, but when her gaze dropped to my empty hands, no luggage, no return ticket, her smile faltered. She hurried away. I was invisible. Engines roared outside, drivers called destinations. Chicago, Pittsburgh, New York. People lined up, scanning their tickets, stepping into buses that would carry them somewhere. My bus had never existed. I clutched my purse against my chest, the leather strap digging into my shoulder. It was the only thing I had left. Inside were tissues, old receipts, a few crumpled bills, and a silence that weighed more than any suitcase. Melissa's words echoed in my skull like a cruel rhyme. One way, figure it out. And then, the truth hit me harder than the words themselves. This wasn't a mistake. The way Melissa hadn't met my eyes. The way Jason stayed quiet. The way my luggage had never made it past the trunk of their car. They had planned this. They hadn't forgotten me. They had erased me. My knees felt weak, but I forced myself toward a metal bench near gate 14. The seat was cold, the kind that makes your back ache the second you sit down. I kept my spine straight, my chin lifted, as if posture alone could stitch together the dignity that was unraveling. My eyes burned, but I would not cry. Grief had already emptied me dry. I looked down at that ticket again, the ink smudged under my sweaty palm. The print was clear, no return, no safety, a deliberate end. I had felt this before. I was 9 years old, waiting for my father to return from a short trip to the next town. He never came back. I had promised myself I would never feel that kind of abandonment again. But here I was, decades later, full circle. Abandoned not by a stranger this time, but by the very person I had carried inside me. My chest tightened. I pressed my hand against it, not for comfort, but to feel what was hidden there. Tucked in the inside pocket of my sweater, close against my skin, was something Melissa hadn't considered. something Jason couldn't erase with silence. It was a small yellowed envelope, the edges soft from years of being carried, the ink fading, but the name still legible, Mr. Davenport. Charles had slipped it into my hand years ago after a friend's visit. "If anything ever goes wrong, Ellie," he had told me, his hand warm around mine, "you call Davenport. He's the kind of man who shows up when everyone else runs." I hadn't thought of that card in years, until now. Melissa thought she had stranded me. Jason thought I would crumble into silence. But they forgot grief had taken my husband. Not my memory, not my resolve. I still had that card. I still had one number to call. And for the first time since Charles's funeral, I felt something ignite inside me. Not sorrow, not despair, fire. They left me here to vanish. But I was not gone. Not yet. The rain that morning was thin, almost polite, the kind that soaks through your coat without you realizing it. I stood at the edge of the gravesite, my hand clutching both halves of our wedding rings, his and mine, pressed together so tightly they left grooves in my skin. Charles lay in the wooden casket beneath a slick canopy, the polished mahogany gleaming with drops of rain. 42 years of love reduced to a box, lowered into wet ground. People gathered around, faces blurred by grief or by the performance of it. Some cried real tears. I could tell from the way their shoulders shook, from the rawness in their voices when they spoke his name. Others dabbed at their eyes with dry tissues, glancing around as if checking to make sure they were seen grieving. Melissa stood at the front, her sobs loud enough for the priest to pause once or twice. She clutched her designer handkerchief like it was a stage prop. And behind her, Jason hovered. Stiff, restless, eyes darting toward the funeral director, already whispering questions about documents, about accounts, about final expenses. His suit was perfectly pressed, his expression carefully neutral, as if death were nothing more than paperwork to process. I stayed silent. My throat ached, but no sound came out. Grief had settled in my chest like wet cement. I stared down at the casket, at the roses laid across it, red petals bleeding rainwater down the wood. When the priest's voice faded into the drizzle, people moved forward to offer condolences. He was such a kind man, Eleanor. 42 years, that's a blessing. At least he didn't suffer long. Each phrase slid off me like watered-down glass. I nodded politely, the way you do when you want people to move along. No one could touch the truth of what I had lost. When it was over, when the last handful of earth hit the lid of that coffin with a soft, hollow thud, I turned back toward the house Charles and I had built together. The house waited for me like a trap, quiet, enormous, echoing with absence. Inside, everything was the same. That was the cruelest part. His slippers still sat under the nightstand, toes pointed toward the bed as if waiting for his feet to slip back in. His toothbrush leaned against mine in the cup by the sink. On the kitchen counter, the old mug he always used was still faintly stained with coffee. I lifted it once just to inhale and swore I could smell him there, warm and steady, even as the room screamed with emptiness. The nights after the funeral stretched like years. I would lie in bed, one side cold, one side untouched. I would turn, half asleep, to tell him something, only to feel my hand fall into the hollow space where he should have been. The silence was heavier than the rain had been. Melissa came by in those first days, her tone soft, her eyes red, but when she hugged me, her perfume stung sharp, too sharp, masking any real emotion. "You need to eat, Mom," she said, her voice rehearsed. "You can't just sit here." Jason stood behind her holding a stack of envelopes, insurance forms, medical bills, financial letters. His comfort came in the shape of numbers and deadlines. I wanted to scream at both of them. Couldn't they see that I wasn't starving for food or struggling with paperwork? I was starving for him, for Charles. For the sound of his laugh in the kitchen, the clumsy way he whistled while looking for his glasses, the warmth of his hand closing over mine when I least expected it. But instead I said nothing. I sat in his chair by the window, the fabric still molded to his shape, and held both rings in my palm. My thumb rubbed the band smooth until my skin was raw. Weeks passed, visitors thinned, casseroles stopped arriving, phone calls grew shorter, the world moved on, but I remained in the same house in the same silence. Some mornings I couldn't tell if I was still alive or if I'd joined him already, trapped between memory and nothingness, and it was in that emptiness that Melissa's words began to seep in. "You should get out of the house, Mom. You should travel. It'll help." Jason nodded along, eyes cool, already suggesting flights, schedules, money. I didn't see it then, not clearly. I only felt the pressure of loneliness, The pull of wanting to belong again, to be useful, to be wanted. That need was the soil. And Melissa and Jason knew how to plant exactly what they wanted in it. They would call it love. They would call it care. But in truth, it was calculation. Because grief had left me weak, and weakness to them was opportunity. The night before the trip, Melissa invited me over for dinner. Her voice on the phone was light, almost cheerful. "It'll be nice, Mom. Just the three of us. We can talk about the trip." For a moment, I let myself believe her. I wanted to. I had been alone in the house too long, surrounded by silence so heavy I could almost hear it breathing. A family dinner sounded like air after drowning. When I arrived, the table was already set. Candles flickered in the center, catching the shine of silverware laid out in neat little lines. Melissa was always good at presentation, everything in place, everything looking perfect. But perfection can be cold, and that night, it felt more like a stage than a home. The food smelled good. Roast chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans sautéed in butter. Comfort food. Food that reminded me of Sundays long ago, when Charles would hum off-key while carving a bird, Melissa still young enough to sit cross-legged on the kitchen counter, stealing bites before dinner. I blinked against the memory and took my seat. Melissa poured me a glass of white wine. Her hand brushed mine briefly, almost too brief to notice. "I'm so glad you're coming with us, Mom. You've been through so much. This will be good for you. A little sunshine, some laughter. Don't you think Dad would want that?" Her words were warm, but something in her eyes didn't match. They were sharp, almost calculating, like she was reading from a script. I nodded anyway, because what else could I do? "Yes. Maybe it'll help." Jason sat at the other end of the table, quiet, chewing carefully. He had always been a man of few words, but that night his silence seemed heavier, like he was waiting for a moment to slip something in. He cleared his throat finally, glanced at Melissa, then said, "Flights weren't cheap this year. Spring break season. Prices are crazy." Melissa jumped in quickly, her tone casual. "We've all been pitching in, a family effort. Everyone helps out, right?" She said it like she was talking about who would do the dishes. Light. Effortless. But the meaning was heavy as stone. I put down my fork. I felt the weight of the words pressing on me. They hadn't asked me outright. They didn't need to. I was a mother. I could hear what was being asked, even in the silence. I smiled weakly and said, "Of course. I'll do my part." The rest of dinner passed with small talk, Melissa describing the beach condo, Jason listing places we might visit. They painted pictures of sunshine, laughter, children running on the sand. I wanted so badly to believe that this was real, that I was included because they wanted me there. But under the candlelight, I could see Jason's jaw tightening whenever money came up. I could see Melissa's hand resting too comfortably on mine, her voice too smooth when she said, "This is going to bring us together, Mom. You'll see." That night, when I returned home, the house greeted me the way it always did. Silent, too big, too empty. Charles's chair sat by the window, shadows gathering in its corners. I walked upstairs to my room and sat on the edge of my bed for a long time before reaching for the wooden jewelry box on my dresser. The box was scratched and old, the hinges a little loose. Charles had given it to me on our 10th anniversary, along with the bracelet that still rested inside. A slim band of gold, modest but real. Inside, he had engraved 2 simple words, 10 more. I lifted the bracelet, felt its weight in my hand. In my mind, I was back in our kitchen that morning. Charles was humming, badly as always, fumbling with the clasp as he slipped it onto my wrist. 10 more years, he had whispered, his grin wide and boyish. Then 10 more after that. And after that, as many as we get. I had laughed, swatting his arm playfully, but I wore that bracelet every day until the clasp broke years later. Even then I kept it, tucked safely in this box, a piece of him I couldn't let go. Now, my fingers trembled as I held it up to the light. My reflection shimmered faintly on its surface, lined and tired. I thought of Melissa's words, Jason's glance, the quiet weight of expectation over dinner. I pressed the bracelet to my lips once, just once, then laid it gently back down. My throat ached. I whispered to the empty room, "I'm sorry, Charles." The next morning, I carried the bracelet to a pawn shop 2 blocks away. The bell above the door jingled, sharp in the dusty quiet. Behind the counter, a man in his 50s looked up, his shirt wrinkled, his glasses perched low on his nose. I set the bracelet down on the glass. He picked it up carefully, turned it in the light. "Good piece," he said softly. "Real gold. Sentimental too, I bet. My voice shook but stayed steady enough. Yes, but I need to sell it. He hesitated. You sure? I nodded even as my throat tightened. I'm sure. The bracelet looked small in his hand, almost fragile, but when he set it on the scale, the numbers glowed, solid, undeniable. He counted out bills, neat stacks, and slid them toward me. I tucked the money into my wallet with shaking fingers. Walking out, the morning sun was bright, too bright. Cars passed, children laughed in the distance, the world carried on. No one knew I had just traded a piece of my marriage, of my life, for paper bills that would fund a trip I wasn't sure I was truly wanted on. That night, I placed the money on my dresser. I stared at it for a long time, whispering, "It's for family. They still need me. Maybe this will keep us together." The words hung in the air like dust in the light, and deep down, though I didn't dare admit it, I felt the sting of truth. Love given out of desperation is the easiest kind to exploit. I turned off the lamp, the room sinking into darkness. The chair where Charles used to sit looked like a shadow with a memory. I closed my eyes, clutching my pillow, repeating to myself until I almost believed it. It's for family. They still need me. But even then, I think a part of me already knew. This sacrifice would not save us. This sacrifice would be betrayed. The station was bursting with life, but I felt like a statue planted in the middle of it all. People rushed past me in every direction, young men with backpacks slung low, mothers herding children with candy-sticky fingers, tired travelers dragging suitcases that rattled across the tile floor. The announcements overhead called out destinations one after another. Now boarding to Chicago, Gate 12. Final call for Pittsburgh, Gate 9. But none of them were for me. I stood there with nothing but that bent one-way ticket in my hand, my suitcase long gone with Melissa and Jason. Melissa turned to me briefly, her eyes flashing with that mix of irritation and superiority she'd mastered since she was a teenager. Then she sighed, her lips curling. She's just a burden. We're done babysitting her. The words didn't come as a whisper. No, she said them loud enough for strangers nearby to hear. Loud enough that the sentence carried across the noise of the terminal and landed on me like a hammer. My whole body went cold. A few people stopped mid-step, their faces flickering with discomfort. One young man frowned at me, then quickly looked away. A couple across from us exchanged glances, whispering to each other while trying not to stare. A mother holding her child against her chest shook her head slightly, as if she couldn't believe what she'd just heard. Every reaction cut deeper. Pity, judgment, avoidance. They were strangers, and yet I felt naked before them, exposed, humiliated. Jason shifted beside Melissa, adjusting the strap of his carry-on. His lips parted like he might say something, anything, but then he looked down at his phone instead. The glow of the screen lit his face, blank, unbothered. His silence was agreement. I wanted to scream at them, to cry out, "I'm not a burden. I raised you. I loved you. I gave you everything I had." But the words stayed stuck in my chest, heavy, choking. Melissa rolled her suitcase forward, heels clicking sharply against the floor. Jason followed. Within seconds, they were swallowed by the security line, disappearing behind the metal detectors, as if I had never been theirs at all. I stood frozen. The terminal buzzed around me, indifferent. My hand shook around that useless ticket, the ink already smudging under the sweat of my palm. I could still hear Melissa's words echoing in my ears, each syllable hammering the truth deeper. Just a burden, just a burden. I sank onto a metal bench nearby, the cold of it biting through my thin coat. My body felt hollow, as if grief had scooped me out from the inside. And then, from behind me, I heard my name. Eleanor? Eleanor Harris? I turned slowly, half afraid, half hoping it wasn't real. Standing there, clutching a worn leather tote bag, was Margaret Lewis, my old neighbor. We hadn't spoken in years, not since she moved across town after her husband died. She was older now, hair streaked with gray, but her eyes were the same. Sharp, kind, watchful. "Margaret?" My voice cracked. She nodded, stepping closer. Her gaze flicked in the direction Melissa had gone, then back to me. She had heard. I could tell by the way her jaw clenched, by the pity and anger mixed in her expression. I didn't mean for you to hear that," I whispered, my cheeks burning with shame, as though Melissa's cruelty had been my fault. Margaret shook her head firmly, her eyes steady on mine. She reached out and set a hand on my shoulder. Her palm was warm, grounding. For the first time all morning, I felt human again, like I wasn't dissolving into the background noise. "You don't deserve that," she said quietly, her voice low enough for only me to hear. "Not from your own. You deserve better, Eleanor." Something inside me cracked at her words. Not in the way Melissa's had, but in a way that let light through. I hadn't realized how much I needed someone to say that, to remind me that I wasn't crazy, that what was happening to me wasn't just in my head. Tears prickled at the corners of my eyes, but I forced them back. I would not fall apart here. Not in front of all these people. "Thank you," I managed, my voice no stronger than a whisper. Margaret squeezed my arm, her grip firm. "I saw everything," she said softly. "Don't think you're alone in this." Her words struck me like a promise. She wasn't just speaking out of pity. She was telling me she would remember, that if the day came when I needed someone to tell the truth, she would. She gave me one last nod before the crowd pushed her onward, her figure swallowed by the tide of travelers. But her words lingered, stronger than the sting of Melissa's cruelty. "You don't deserve that. You deserve better." I sat up straighter on the bench. My chest still ached, my heart still broken, but for the first time that day, I wasn't completely invisible. Someone had seen. Someone had heard. Melissa and Jason thought they could erase me with silence and indifference, but Margaret's voice had etched the truth into stone. I pressed my purse close, feeling the outline of the envelope tucked inside, the one with Davenport's number. Between that old business card and Margaret's words, I realized something. I still had witnesses. I still had a choice. They hadn't buried me in shame. They had just given me a reason to rise. Sitting on that cold bench in the bus station, clutching my purse like it was the last piece of dignity I had left, my mind began to wander back. This wasn't the first time Melissa and Jason had taken from me. It wasn't even the second. It had been happening for years, each time leaving a scar I had tried to cover with excuses. I remembered the kitchen remodel. Melissa had called me, her voice syrupy sweet. "Mom, we're redoing the kitchen. It's going to be amazing. We'll finally have space for the kids, for family dinners, for you when you visit, but it's costing a little more than we planned." I had hesitated. Charles and I had been saving that silver set, our wedding gift from his parents. It had sat in the china cabinet for decades, polished for holidays, but mostly untouched. It was the one thing I had told myself I'd leave to Melissa one day. When she asked for help, I thought, why wait? She'll enjoy it more now. So I sold the silver, watched the pieces disappear one by one into a pawnshop bag. The next time I visited Melissa's house, the kitchen was bright and glossy, all granite counters and stainless steel appliances. She showed it off with pride. "Isn't it beautiful, Mom? So modern." But not once did she thank me. Then came Jason's big idea. He had sat at my dining table, papers spread out like some kind of businessman. "It's a great investment, Mom," he said, his voice calm, persuasive. "A small shop, good location, guaranteed return. You put in now, and we'll all be better off down the road." I had my doubts, but he had a way of speaking that made me feel foolish for questioning. Charles was already gone by then, and I was still raw with grief. So when Jason asked, I handed over my savings passbook. Years of careful putting aside, gone with the scratch of his pen. He promised updates. He promised returns. Weeks passed, then months, and the only thing I ever got back was silence. The shop never opened. When I asked, Melissa laughed lightly, waved her hand. "Oh, Jason tried, but it just didn't work out. Don't worry, Mom. You'll manage. You always do." And she said it with that dismissive tone, like it was nothing, like years of saving, of sacrifice, could be brushed aside with a shrug. The worst cut of all came with the hospital bill. It was late one night when Melissa called. Her youngest had a bad fever, rushed to the ER. My heart seized. I drove straight to the hospital, clutching my purse, praying. When I arrived, Melissa was nowhere to be found. Jason wasn't there either. It was just the child, pale and trembling, and a nurse holding out paperwork. "Insurance?" she asked gently. Melissa's name was listed, but the card was expired. Payments overdue. The bill was thousands. The nurse hesitated, clearly embarrassed. Someone has to take responsibility. So I did. I pulled out my checkbook, my hands shaking, and signed. Anything to make sure my grandchild was cared for. Later, when Melissa finally showed up, her hair freshly styled, Jason beside her smelling faintly of cologne, she brushed it off. "We were out of town, Mom. We couldn't get back in time. But you handled it. You always do. That line, that same line every time. You always do. It wasn't gratitude, it wasn't respect, it was expectation. They knew I would pick up the pieces. They knew I would open my wallet, swallow my pride, and cover their mess. Sitting there in the bus station, I realized I had been conditioned into it. Conditioned into sacrifice, into silence, into believing that giving was the only way to hold on to family. But looking back, I saw the pattern clearly for the first time. The silver set, the savings account, the hospital bill. Each time I gave. Each time they took, and each time they dismissed me with the same cold assurance. You'll manage, Mom. You always do. My hands tightened around my purse. No more. For the first time in years, I felt a hot ember of anger stir inside me. It burned through the shame, through the exhaustion. Melissa and Jason had taken enough. And this time, I wasn't going to manage. This time, I was going to fight. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat alone in the living room, the lamp casting a weak circle of light on the floor. Charles's chair was across from me, empty, its cushion molded to the memory of his body. Sometimes, when the house was quiet enough, I almost convinced myself I could still hear the faint creak of that chair as he leaned back with the evening paper. But tonight, there was nothing, just silence and the tick of the old clock on the wall. My phone lay face down on the coffee table. I hadn't touched it all evening. What was the point? No one called me anymore unless it was about a bill or some unwanted telemarketer. Melissa certainly wouldn't call, not after the bus station. But then the phone buzzed. A small vibration that startled me so much I nearly spilled the tea I hadn't touched in an hour. I reached for it slowly, expecting nothing, maybe a wrong number. But when I turned it over, my heart stuttered. It was a message from Emma, my granddaughter. Just 12. A child caught in the storm of adults who should have known better. The message was short, almost trembling in its simplicity. Grandma, I'm sorry. I didn't know. I froze. My eyes blurred with sudden tears. She had reached out. She had seen. My fingers shook as I typed back. Didn't know what, sweetheart? For a long moment, nothing. Just the empty 3 dots, appearing and vanishing as if she were struggling to find the words. Finally, they appeared on my screen. I didn't know they were going to leave you like that. I thought we were all going together. Mom told me you'd meet us later. My chest tightened. Melissa had lied even to her own daughter. To cover her cruelty, she had spun another story, shielding herself from blame. Before I could reply, another message arrived. This time, it wasn't words. It was an audio file. I hesitated. My thumb hovered over the play button. My heart raced as if I already knew what I was about to hear. Then I pressed it. The sound was muffled at first, the chatter of the bus station, the squeal of rolling wheels. And then, cutting through it like a knife, Melissa's voice. Clear, cold, final. She's just a burden. We're done babysitting her. The file ended abruptly, the silence after it louder than any noise. I sat frozen, the phone heavy in my hand. Hearing it again, those words I had tried to push away to convince myself I had misheard, was like being struck twice. But this time, there was no denying it. It wasn't my imagination. It wasn't just my word against theirs. It was proof. My hands shook as I pressed the phone to my chest. Tears slid down my cheeks before I could stop them. Another message buzzed in. I thought maybe you'd want this, in case. I don't know. Mom and Dad fight a lot lately. I don't like it. Sometimes I hide in my room. Sometimes I wish I could come live with you. I covered my mouth with my hand, trying to steady the sob that rose, in my throat. Emma shouldn't have to carry this. She shouldn't have to be the one to see the cracks, to feel the weight of her parents' anger. She was a child. My sweet Emma, who used to sit with me in the kitchen licking cookie dough off her fingers while I baked, who curled up beside me with her storybooks, asking me to read until she drifted asleep, who loved to draw little gardens, flowers spilling across her sketch pad like secrets only she understood. And now here she was, a child of 12, apologizing for the sins of her parents. I typed back, my vision blurred. Thank you, my darling girl. You didn't do anything wrong. I love you. Her response came quickly, almost desperately. I love you too, Grandma. Please don't tell Mom I sent this. I stared at the screen for a long time, the words searing into me. Melissa thought she had silenced me. Jason thought his silence could bury the truth, but they had forgotten the one thing they couldn't control, Their own child's eyes, her ears, her heart. Emma had seen. Emma had heard. And now Emma had given me the one thing I hadn't had before. Evidence. I leaned back in Charles's chair, clutching the phone. My tears slowed, replaced by something steadier, harder. This recording wasn't just a child's frightened attempt at kindness. It was my ace, my trump card, my proof that I wasn't crazy, that I wasn't inventing the cruelty. For weeks I had felt erased, discarded, invisible. But now, with one shaky recording sent in secret by a scared 12-year-old, I felt the balance shift. Melissa had left me at the bus station to vanish, but thanks to Emma, I had something they could never erase. I had the truth. The next morning I dressed with care, not because I expected anyone to notice, but because I needed to remind myself that I still existed, that I was more than someone's discarded mother, more than a burden left on a bench. I put on my navy blue coat, the one Charles had always said made me look dignified, and slipped Davenport's card into my pocket. My hands trembled as I locked the front door. For weeks, maybe months, I had felt powerless. But today, for the first time, I was choosing where to go. The taxi pulled up in front of a narrow brick building on Jefferson Street. The sign out front was faded. Davenport and Kosian attorneys at law. It looked almost the same as the last time I'd been here, years ago, with Charles at my side, when we came to finalize our will. My throat tightened at the memory. Charles's hand had been warm in mine that day. He'd laughed at the seriousness of it all, joked about lawyers liking too much paperwork. I could almost hear him now, his voice low and reassuring. If anything happens, Ellie, Davenport's the one you call. I climbed the steps slowly, my heart pounding. Inside, the office smelled faintly of old wood and lemon polish. The waiting area was small, lined with bookshelves full of thick legal binders. On the far wall, a row of framed photos. Local events, handshakes, ribbon cuttings. My eyes stopped on one picture in particular. Charles and Davenport, side by side at a community fundraiser, smiling with their arms crossed like old soldiers. I swallowed hard and pressed my hand to the frame just for a moment. Eleanor? I turned. Mr. Davenport stood in the doorway of his office. Older now, grayer, slower in his movements, but his eyes were the same. Steady, kind, the kind of eyes that could make you believe you weren't foolish for asking for help. Come in, he said gently. I followed him inside. His office was modest, a wooden desk scarred with years of use, stacks of files neatly arranged, a brass lamp casting warm light. Behind him, on a shelf, sat a framed photograph of Charles in his younger days. I hadn't known Davenport had kept it. My breath caught in my throat. We sat across from each other. For a moment I couldn't speak. The silence stretched, filled only by the ticking of a small clock on his desk. Finally, Davenport folded his hands and leaned forward. Tell me everything, he said simply, and so I did. I told him about the family trip, about Melissa's cold smile at the bus station, Jason's silence, the ticket that was never meant to bring me back. I told him about the pawn shop, the bracelet, the sacrifices that had piled up over the years. My voice broke when I told him about Emma, about the secret message, the recording. When I finished, the room was still. Davenport didn't speak right away. He removed his glasses, rubbed the bridge of his nose, then looked at me with an expression that was both grave and furious. This is more than cruelty, he said at last, his voice low but firm. It borders on elder abuse, financial exploitation, emotional abandonment. They've crossed a line. I felt my shoulders slump in both relief and exhaustion. Someone else had said it, out loud. It wasn't just me whispering it to myself in the dark. Davenport leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. You're not powerless, Eleanor. You still have your will. You still have control over your estate, your assets. And you have evidence now. That recording, it's damning. He paused, studying me carefully. Charles trusted me to look after you if he couldn't, and I intend to honor that. We'll start by updating your will. Today. My breath hitched. Today? He nodded firmly. There's no reason to wait. I'll remove Melissa and Jason as beneficiaries, effective immediately. We'll add new instructions, your choice, not theirs, and we'll make copies, secure them where they can't touch a thing. Do you understand me? Tears welled in my eyes, but this time they weren't from sorrow. They were from something I hadn't felt in far too long. Safety. I nodded, my voice barely more than a whisper. Yes. Davenport opened a folder, clicked his pen, and began writing. His movements were calm, deliberate, but I could sense the urgency behind them. For the first time in months, I felt the weight on my chest lift just slightly. I wasn't alone in this fight. I had someone in my corner. And as I watched Davenport's pen scratch across the page, a quiet resolve grew inside me. Melissa thought she had left me powerless at that bus station. Jason thought silence would keep me trapped. But they were wrong. I wasn't finished. The next morning, I was back in Davenport's office. The same wooden desk, the same ticking clock, the same faint smell of lemon polish on old shelves. But something was different. The papers in my purse felt heavier, as though they had gathered weight overnight, pressing against me with the urgency of everything I had to do. Davenport sat across from me, glasses perched low on his nose, typing something slowly on his computer. His office was quiet except for the rhythmic clacking of keys. When he paused, he looked up at me, his expression steady. "Eleanor," he began, "what happened to you isn't just cruelty. It falls into a category the law takes seriously: elder exploitation." I frowned slightly. "Exploitation?" He nodded. "Yes. Elder exploitation covers a wide range of behavior: financial manipulation, emotional coercion, abandonment, anything that takes advantage of a person's age or vulnerability. You'd be surprised how many cases start the same way: a parent who trusts too much, and children who think love means access to money." He leaned back, hands folded. "I worked one case not long ago. A woman in her 70s. Her son convinced her to refinance her home so he could start a business. He drained every cent, then left her with debt she could never repay. Another case, an elderly man whose daughter borrowed his pension checks every month for years. He was too ashamed to admit it until a neighbor reported the neglect." My stomach twisted. Each story sounded like mine, told in a different voice. Davenport's eyes softened. "You're not alone, Eleanor. And what Melissa and Jason have done, well, the law doesn't look kindly on children abandoning or exploiting their parents, especially when there's financial deception involved." I lowered my gaze, fingers twisting in my lap. "But I gave them the money. I wasn't forced." He shook his head firmly. "Intent matters. Consent under false pretenses is not consent at all. They misled you, took advantage of your grief, your trust. That's not just family cruelty, it's legal grounds." I sat still, letting the words sink in. "Now," Davenport continued, leaning forward, "the most important thing is protection. You have that recording your granddaughter sent? The one with Melissa's words?" I nodded, pulling my phone from my purse. "Yes, Emma recorded it at the bus station." His brows rose slightly, impressed. "Keep that safe. Make copies. That recording is more than memory. It's evidence. It proves intention, tone, attitude. In court, that could be the difference between disbelief and justice." I swallowed hard, sliding the phone back into my bag. "I'll protect it." "Good," he said. Then, with a small, resolute nod, he turned back to his computer. "Now let's deal with your will." The sound of keys filled the room again, deliberate, final. I watched as words appeared on the screen, each one pulling me further from the shadow of Melissa and Jason. Remove Melissa Harris and Jason Harris as beneficiaries in full, effective immediately. Davenport read it aloud as he typed, his voice firm, each syllable like a nail sealing a door shut. He glanced at me. "We'll redirect everything according to your wishes. The house, the land by the lake, the savings. They no longer belong to them." My chest tightened with both grief and relief. "Charles would have wanted me to do this," I whispered. "I know," Davenport replied softly, "and he'd want you protected. This isn't punishment, Eleanor. It's clarity. It's reclaiming what's yours." He typed on, adding clauses, legal phrasing I didn't fully understand, but the meaning was clear. With every keystroke, Melissa and Jason slipped further out of my future. When he finally leaned back, stretching his shoulders, he said, "There, a draft. It'll need to be notarized, but effective from the moment you sign. I'll keep one copy here locked. Another will go to a third-party executor you choose. That way, even if they come knocking, they'll never touch it." I exhaled, the breath trembling out of me like it had been trapped for months. For the first time since Charles's funeral, I felt a thread of safety weaving back through me. Davenport set his pen down, looked me straight in the eyes. "You've been silenced long enough, Eleanor. This—" He tapped the screen. "This is the start of your voice being heard again." My throat tightened. I nodded, unable to find words. As I left his office that afternoon, the folder in my bag felt different. No longer a burden, No longer a relic of the past, it felt like armor, and for the first time in a long time I felt that justice had already begun. Havenbrook's community hall was alive with chatter that evening. Folding chairs lined up in neat rows, the smell of coffee and fresh-baked rolls lingering in the air. It was the monthly residents' meeting, a gathering where neighbors discussed everything from gardening schedules to fundraising events. On the surface, it was ordinary, another night of small-town conversation. But for me, it was not ordinary. For me, it was the stage. I sat in the second row, hands folded in my lap, the folder Davenport had prepared tucked under my arm. My heart beat steady, not frantic, but heavy, like a drum announcing something inevitable. Melissa and Jason had shown up too. Of course they had. They'd heard about the meeting, about how some of the Havenbrook committee had been considering dedicating funds to expand elder care. Melissa saw it as an opportunity, a chance to polish her image, to regain the admiration she thought was slipping. They entered with forced confidence, Melissa in a fitted blazer, Jason trailing behind in silence, his face drawn. Whispers followed them down the aisle. Everyone had heard rumors since the dinner party collapse. When the meeting began, the committee chair welcomed everyone, spoke about budgets and projects. I barely heard her. My focus was on what sat inside my purse, my granddaughter's recording. Halfway through the agenda, I rose to my feet. My chair scraped against the floor, the sound sharp enough to turn every head. The chairwoman paused mid-sentence. I cleared my throat, my voice carrying stronger than I expected. I have something to say. All eyes turned toward me. Melissa stiffened in her seat, her smile frozen in place, already nervous about what might come next. I stepped into the aisle, my shoulders squared. For 70 years, I had lived quietly, endured quietly, given quietly, but not tonight. For months, I began. I believed silence was the only way to survive. I thought if I gave enough, endured enough, my family would love me back. But I was wrong. My voice didn't shake. It grew louder, firmer. My estate, everything Charles and I built with our hands and our sacrifices, will never go to those who abandoned me. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Melissa's face drained of color. Jason shifted in his chair, his hand twitching against his knee. I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone. My fingers didn't tremble this time. I tapped the file Emma had sent me, raised the speaker high enough for everyone to hear, the room filled with the unmistakable sound of Melissa's voice. She's just a burden. We're done babysitting her. The words cut through the hall like a blade. Gasps erupted. Neighbors exchanged stunned glances. A woman in the front row covered her mouth with her hand. Melissa shot up from her chair. "That's out of context," she shouted, her voice shrill, cracking. She twisted it. Emma must have twisted it. But no one was listening to her excuses. They were still hearing her words, dripping with contempt, played back without mercy. Jason didn't move. His face had gone pale, his body rigid, eyes fixed on the floor. I turned slowly, meeting the gaze of every person in that hall. That is who they are when they think no one is listening. That is how they see me, not as a mother, not as family, but as a burden. And they thought I would stay silent, but not anymore. The murmurs rose into full voices. How could they say that? After everything Eleanor's done? Shameful. Melissa tried to speak again, her hands waving wildly, her voice cracking. She doesn't understand. She's confused. But the room wasn't with her. Not anymore. I held my chin high. My will has been changed. My house, my land, my savings, they no longer belong to Melissa or Jason. They belong to organizations that protect the elderly from cruelty like this. They belong to those who know the meaning of care. The applause began quietly, just a few hands at first. Then it grew, spreading through the hall until the sound filled every corner. It wasn't just for me, it was for every person in that room who had ever felt invisible, dismissed, exploited. Melissa's face burned crimson. Jason remained still, his silence louder than her protests. I let the sound wash over me. For the first time in years, I wasn't speaking into emptiness. I was heard. And in that moment, standing in the middle of Havenbrook's community hall, I knew the truth. The power they thought they had over me was gone. Forever. The silence after the recording ended was suffocating. Melissa's words, "She's just a burden. We're done babysitting her," seemed to hang in the air, etched into the wooden beams of the Havenbrook Community Hall. No one moved. No one breathed. The only sound was the faint hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. Then a chair scraped back. Margaret Lewis, my old neighbor leaning on her cane, rose to her feet. Her voice cut through the silence, steady and unflinching. "I was there," she said, her eyes locked on Melissa. "I was at the bus station that day. I saw Melissa push Eleanor away. I heard those exact words with my own ears. Eleanor didn't invent this. She didn't exaggerate. It happened, and I'll swear it under oath." The hall rippled with gasps. Heads swiveled from Margaret to Melissa. Melissa's lips parted, her painted smile gone, her expression frozen somewhere between rage and disbelief. I don't know what she's talking about," Melissa stammered. Her voice, so smooth moments ago, cracked like brittle glass. "She's twisting it. That's not what I meant." But her denial rang hollow. Another figure rose. Mr. Henderson, a retired teacher, his back straight, his voice resonant with decades of authority. "I may not have been there, but I've known Eleanor Harris most of my life. I've seen her give more than she ever had. She raised Melissa with sacrifice. She supported Jason when he had nothing. She helped half the families in this room when they were struggling. If Eleanor says she was abandoned, if we all just heard the words on that recording, then I say we believe her. Enough is enough." Murmurs swelled, turning into agreement. "He's right. We've all seen how much Eleanor has given. She doesn't deserve this." Melissa tried again, louder this time, her voice shrill. "You don't understand. Mom's confused. She's old. She forgets things. She's been manipulated." She threw a desperate glance toward Jason. "Tell them. Jason, say something." But Jason sat hunched, elbows on his knees, his hands clasped tightly as if holding himself together. His face was pale, his jaw rigid, his eyes fixed on the floor. He said nothing. His silence screamed louder than Melissa's protests. At the back of the room, a woman in a navy blue jacket rose. She held a small notepad, her pen poised. Her voice was calm but authoritative. "My name is Sandra Ruiz. I'm here tonight as a representative of County Social Services. And I want to be very clear. What we've just witnessed, the recording, the testimony, it qualifies as elder neglect and potential financial exploitation. I will be filing a report immediately. There will be an investigation." Melissa's knees seemed to buckle. She gripped the back of her chair as if the floor had tilted beneath her. "No, you can't. You don't know the whole story," she pleaded, her words tumbling out too fast. "I've been taking care of her. Everyone knows that. Ask anyone." But the room didn't believe her anymore. Instead, voices rose one after another. A mother of 3 from the neighborhood stood. "Eleanor watched my kids for years when I couldn't afford daycare. She never asked for a penny. She gave her time, her love." An older man spoke next. "When my wife was sick, Eleanor brought meals to us 3 nights a week. She'd never let us go hungry. That's the kind of woman she is." A younger woman near the front added quietly, "When my father died, Eleanor sat with my mother for hours so she wouldn't be alone. That's who she is. That's who she's always been." Each testimony struck like a hammer against Melissa's crumbling mask. Melissa shook her head violently, her earrings catching the light as she tried to hold on to her script. "None of you understand. She's making me the villain because she's bitter. She doesn't know what she's saying." But even her voice wavered now. The crowd wasn't with her, not anymore. Jason's silence was damning. He rubbed the back of his neck, still refusing to meet a single gaze, not even his wife's. For once he had no script, no excuses, and then it happened. The applause. It began softly, almost hesitantly. A few claps from the side of the room. Then more hands joined in, building like a wave until the sound was rolling through the hall in thunderous unity. People stood one by one, then all at once. Some clapped, some cheered, some even stamped their feet against the wooden floor. The noise shook the walls, echoing down the corridor outside. They weren't just applauding me. They were applauding the truth. They were applauding every elderly person who had ever been dismissed, abandoned, made to feel invisible. I stood in the center of it, my chin lifted, my eyes stinging with tears I refused to hide. For the first time in so long, I was not alone. I was not silent. I was not erased. Melissa sat, her head bowed, her face burning crimson. Jason remained motionless, a statue of shame. The social worker closed her notepad firmly, giving me a small approving nod. "You are not alone, Mrs. Harris," she said, her voice low but sure, "and this will not be ignored." I let the applause wash over me. It wasn't noise. It was vindication. For decades, I had given quietly, endured quietly, loved quietly. But now, in this hall, surrounded by witnesses, my truth had broken free. Justice had begun. The applause inside Havenbrook's hall was still echoing in my ears when the meeting ended. People were shaking my hand, patting my shoulder, whispering encouragement. But outside, in the parking lot beneath the harsh glow of the street lamps, another kind of drama was unfolding. Melissa's voice carried first. It sliced through the cool night air, shrill and frantic. "Do you see what you've done?" She shouted at Jason, her heels clattering against the cracked asphalt as she spun on him. "You just sat there. You didn't defend me, not once." Jason stood stiff, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. His jaw was tight, his face flushed. What was I supposed to say, Melissa? They had the recording. Your words, clear as day. What do you want me to do? Call everyone in there a liar? Her voice broke into a sob, but it wasn't sorrow. It was rage. You let her humiliate me, my own mother, and you just sat there like a coward. Jason's head snapped up, eyes flashing. A coward? I told you to keep your mouth shut at that bus station. But no, you had to say it loud enough for everyone to hear, and now look where we are. We're ruined. Melissa's hands shook as she gestured wildly, tears streaking down her mascara. Don't you dare blame me. You've been leeching off her money just as much as I have. Your brilliant business investments, all gone. And who signed the checks? She did. Because of you. Jason stepped closer, his voice low and venomous. At least I didn't record myself calling her a burden. That was all you, Melissa. That was your voice. Your arrogance. For a moment, the two of them stood inches apart, faces twisted in fury, words like knives cutting through the night. And then, a small sound. From the far edge of the parking lot, near the shadow of a street lamp, stood Emma. She was clutching her backpack straps, her shoulders hunched, her eyes wide and wet. She hadn't made a sound until now, but the sight of her parents ripping each other apart had finally broken her silence. Stop, she whispered. Neither Melissa nor Jason heard her. Their fight had grown too loud, too consuming. You think this is my fault? Melissa screamed, her voice hoarse. You think I wanted to be the one holding everything together while you hid behind your silence? You're worthless, Jason. His voice boomed back, filled with years of resentment. And you're a parasite. You've never cared about anyone but yourself. Not even your own mother, not even your own daughter. That last word landed like a blow. Melissa froze, chest heaving. Jason's chest rose and fell in ragged breaths. And Emma flinched as if struck, her small hands balled into fists at her sides. Please, she said louder this time, her voice trembling. Please stop. Melissa whipped around then, finally noticing her daughter, her face crumpled, streaked with tears and fury. But instead of reaching for Emma, instead of softening, she only wailed, You don't understand, baby. Grandma turned everyone against us. Emma's eyes brimmed over, tears sliding silently down her cheeks. She shook her head, her voice barely a whisper, but cutting through the night like glass. No, Mom, you did that. The words stunned Melissa into silence. Jason turned away, scrubbing a hand over his face, unable to look at either of them. The parking lot was quiet now, except for Melissa's broken sobs. She sank against the hood of their car, mascara smeared, shoulders shaking. Jason stood rigid a few feet away, his back turned, his silence an admission of defeat. And Emma? She stood alone, caught between them, her small figure swallowed by the shadows. Too young to carry the weight of their collapse, yet old enough to see the truth. From where I stood across the lot, unseen, my heart twisted. Justice had been served. The masks had fallen. But Emma, she was the one paying the heaviest price. I wanted to run to her, to gather her into my arms, to tell her she wasn't invisible like I had been. But I stayed still, watching, knowing this was their unraveling to endure. As Melissa sobbed and Jason seethed in silence, Emma wiped her cheeks with the back of her sleeve. Her eyes lifted to the hall behind us, where voices still lingered, where truth had been spoken and justice claimed. She looked toward me then, just for a second, and our eyes met. Hers were filled with sorrow, but also with something else, resolve. And I knew in that moment she saw everything. She would remember everything. The world had finally turned against Melissa and Jason. Their collapse was complete. The morning was unusually still, the kind of quiet that makes you pause, as if the world is holding its breath. I sat at my kitchen table with a lukewarm cup of coffee, staring at the streaks of sunlight cutting across the floorboards. The folder from Davenport rested safely on the side counter, like a sealed vault of my new future. Then my laptop chimed. A new email. My stomach tightened when I saw the sender's name. Melissa. The subject line read, "I'm sorry, Mom, but at least let us keep the garden." I hesitated before clicking. My finger hovered over the trackpad, a small part of me bracing for another wound. Still, I opened it. Her words spilled across the screen in a rushed block of text. "Mom, I don't know what to say. Jason and I got the letter from the lawyer this morning, and we didn't think you'd actually go through with it. Maybe we were wrong. Maybe we didn't handle things the right way. Tanya says it wasn't meant to feel like abandonment, but you've gone too far. This is serious. You've cut us out completely. The house, the savings, the lake property, all of it. We don't deserve that." The next lines tightened my chest. "At least let us keep the garden behind the house. The kids planted flowers there with you. You know how much it means to them. It's part of our family history, Mom. Please, if nothing else, let us keep that piece." Her tone shifted, pleading but edged with entitlement. "We're not perfect, but we're still your family. Think of the grandchildren. Think of Emma. She'll be devastated if you take it away. Can we please talk? Just one call. Just 5 minutes. Don't do this to us." I leaned back in my chair, my throat dry. It wasn't remorse. It wasn't even an apology. It was bargaining. Melissa wasn't asking for forgiveness. She was asking for land, for property, for leverage. Not once did she say, "I'm sorry for leaving you at the bus station." Not once did she say, "I'm sorry I treated you like less than family." No. The garden was her currency, and she thought sentimentality would be my weakness. I closed the laptop slowly. My reflection wavered on the dark screen, tired eyes staring back. For a moment, grief surged inside me. The garden. Oh, how many afternoons Charles had spent there. His hands sunk deep into the soil, his humming low and steady. I remembered Emma's small hands patting dirt around a sapling, Charles guiding her fingers with his own. The laughter, the smell of earth, the sunlight warming our backs. Charles had turned to me once, wiping his brow with the back of his hand. His voice, soft and certain, came back to me as clearly as if he were still here. "Ellie, not everything you plant will grow, but what does, that's yours." His words settled over me like a benediction. The garden Melissa begged for was soil. Just soil. But what had grown there? Love, care, belonging. That was mine. Mine to keep in memory, not hers to claim. I didn't reply to her email. My silence was my answer. Some doors, once closed, should never be opened again. A few days later, I walked down the hallway toward Havenbrook's common room. My steps were slow, uncertain. I wasn't sure if I belonged. On the door was a handwritten sign. Story Circle, 5 p.m., all welcome. I pushed it open. The room was warm, lit by soft lamps and the faint glow of dusk spilling through tall windows. Chairs had been arranged in a circle. About a dozen women were already seated, their faces lined with age, with laughter, with loss. Each one carried a presence that said, "I have lived, I have endured, I am still here." I lingered by the doorway until a woman with silver hair and eyes sharp with kindness looked up. She smiled and gestured. "Come in, dear. There's room." I slipped into an empty chair. My hands fidgeted with the strap of my purse, my heart beating harder than it should. The circle began. One by one, women shared pieces of themselves. A widow named Ruth spoke of how her son had drained her pension checks, always promising to pay her back, until she had nothing left. She told it plainly, not fishing for pity, but her voice trembled with both pain and defiance. Another woman, Gloria, spoke of being shuffled between her children's homes, treated like luggage. "They always said it was for my own good," she said bitterly, "but none of them wanted me for more than 2 weeks at a time." Heads nodded. Soft murmurs of agreement filled the air. A hand reached out, squeezed hers. No judgment, only recognition. As their words filled the room, something loosened inside me. This wasn't just a circle of stories, it was a circle of witnesses, of survivors, a place where the invisible became visible again. Then the facilitator, a kind-faced woman named Helen, looked at me. "Eleanor," she said gently, "would you like to share?" My name, spoken out loud. Not as an afterthought, not as a burden, but as someone who belonged. For a moment I couldn't speak. My throat closed, tears threatening to rise. But then I inhaled, steadied, and let a smile tug at my lips. "Yes, I said softly. I think I would. The circle leaned in, waiting, not rushing me, not demanding, but ready to listen. And in that moment, I understood something Melissa never could. Family isn't just blood. Family is presence. It is choice. It is people who see you, who say your name, who wait for your words. I had lost one family, but here, in this circle, I had found another. The garden Melissa begged for was land. But this was where something new could grow. The knock on my door was timid, almost too soft to hear. For a moment I thought I imagined it, but then it came again, a little louder, followed by a small, nervous voice. Grandma? I hurried to the door, my heart suddenly racing, and there she was. Emma, my sweet granddaughter. Her backpack hung loosely from one shoulder, her hair slightly messy from travel. She looked so young, so fragile, and yet there was a determination in her eyes that startled me. Emma? What are you doing here? I whispered, pulling her inside quickly. Do they know you're here? She shook her head, biting her lip. I took the bus. It was just a few stops. I wanted to see you. Her small hands trembled as she reached into her bag. I made you something. She pulled out a folded sheet of paper, edges wrinkled from being carried close. She handed it to me with both hands, as though it were something precious. When I opened it, my breath caught. It was a drawing. Colored pencils on plain paper, but filled with care. A garden. Our garden. Flowers blooming in crooked but joyful rows, a big tree in the center, and two figures standing together, one taller, one smaller, both holding hands. Above it, in uneven letters, she had written, Grandma's Garden. The tears came before I could stop them. I pressed the picture to my chest, then pulled Emma into my arms. She smelled faintly of crayons and shampoo, and her small frame shook against me. I'm sorry, she whispered into my shoulder. I didn't know what they were going to do. I didn't know they would leave you. I don't want to be like them. I held her tighter. Oh, sweetheart, none of this is your fault, not one bit. You are nothing like them. You have your own heart, your own choices. She pulled back slightly, her eyes glistening. Can I still come see you, even if Mom and Dad don't want me to? I cupped her cheek, smiling through my tears. You can always see me, and you can always write to me. I reached into my drawer and pulled out an old leather-bound notebook. It was worn at the edges, the kind Charles and I used to write in together on Sunday afternoons. I placed it in her hands. This will be yours now, I told her. A journal, a place for your truth. Always write the truth, Emma, even if it hurts, even if no one else wants to hear it. That way, you'll never lose yourself. Her fingers traced the cover. She nodded solemnly, as if accepting a sacred task. We sat together for a long while, her head resting on my shoulder, the drawing spread out before us. In that moment, it didn't matter what Melissa or Jason thought. Emma had chosen differently. The cycle could be broken. That night, after Emma had left, after I had walked her to the bus stop, pressed a kiss to her forehead and watched until the bus disappeared down the road, I returned to my room at Havenbrook. The halls were quiet now. A soft hum of conversation drifted from the lounge, but most had retired. I sat by my window, the night air cool against my skin. On the table beside me was a framed photo of Charles, his smile frozen forever in that familiar warmth. I placed my hand gently on the frame. They left me at the station, I whispered, my voice steady now. But I found my way home? Outside, the courtyard glowed under the lamplight. I could see shadows moving, neighbors sharing tea, a nurse walking slowly with a resident, two women laughing softly on a bench. It wasn't the house I had built with Charles. It wasn't the garden Melissa begged for, but it was mine now. A place where I wasn't tolerated but welcomed. A place where my name was spoken, not sighed. A place where I belonged. I leaned back in my chair, closing my eyes. The world hadn't given me a perfect ending. Melissa and Jason hadn't repented, hadn't begged forgiveness that mattered. And maybe they never would. But I had something better. I had justice. I had healing. I had Emma's hope in my arms and Charles's wisdom in my memory. And here, in Havenbrook, surrounded by people who chose me, not for what I could give, but for who I was, I finally had peace. The camera of the mind's eye would pull back then. A woman silhouetted in her window, hand resting on her husband's photo, light spilling out gently into the night. the faint sound of laughter from her new community drifting up like music. Not an ending tied with ribbons, but something truer. A beginning born from survival. A life reclaimed.